You said in your book, Woke Inc., that your parents got an arranged marriage.
Yeah.
Which is, I mean, like, growing up in the United States, growing up in Southern California is
We just
nuts
don't
to hear.
see that,
Like,
yeah.
like we think that stopped existing 100 years ago.
It's nuts, but it's not as nuts as you think, actually, because it's kind of come full circle.
Well, they've been
actually.
married 40 years
Oh, they're very
successfully.
successful.
And you also
Yeah,
said,
marriage.
wasn't the marriage like 12 days after their first real date?
Yeah,
of, like,
I mean, it was
getting
like
to
it
know
was
each
like
other?
less than 2
Can you
weeks.
walk us
after.
through how does that happen?
Yeah.
So two families get together. They each
They
pick
knew
who
each
they
other
think.
before, right?
What's
the
the
families
process
didn't know
like?
each other before, but they knew of each other like via networks. So my mom was living up and grew up in Mysore, which is one part of India. My dad was in Kerala, and via family networks. And there's a lot of pre-vetting that went into it. We're like, all right, they're both educated. They're both like even like there's not some major mismatch in height, right? Like there's a lot of factors that go into this, right? Were they, academically inclined? They know what each other's interests are.
But what did they think about it? Like your dad and your mom, weren't they like,
It would just
I
be
want to
culturally
Nobody's
normal,
forcing it on
right?
them.
Yeah.
Nobody's forcing it on them.
They're down- they're cool with it?
The final consent for the decision, but to put them together and then say, hey, if you guys want to go with it, go with it. That sounds nuts compared to the environment we grow up, which is different than I'm about to get to where we are now. But the environment that I grew up in was one where you would date people that you might meet at school or at a bar or in a neighborhood or whatever and have an organic interaction that guides you. All the way now to Gen 3, where you have an algorithm that asks you for your preferences and asks you
Then
about
it's
your
just
height.
like right or left.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
just like the
And
bar
it
is
doesn't seem
set.
effective, which is weird.
That's exactly. So that seems a lot more similar to me than like to what my parents' arranged marriage was. You're
Yeah.
arranged by AI today instead of arranged by human beings who love you. So I like the way it went for me, which was my wife and I met at a party, and we were naturally drawn to each other, and we had an immediate human chemistry that we then followed and led us to the life that we've pursued, and that's cool. But what the irony now of, yes, we can look back and say like arranged marriages are weird, but it's equally weird from my frame of mind to look at like algorithmically set up anonymity for swiping left and right. There's senses in which, I just went to a wedding with one of my best friends who met exactly in that same setting, but it felt like it wasn't so different than the setting in which my parents met, which is kind of funny and interesting.
How did they get married after 12 days? Why 12 days?
Yeah.
Is it like after that,
12
after
days
a
is
week
pretty
and a half?
short, if you ask me. So I'm not.
But like,
I'm
whose
not
decision
endorsing?
was
I'm
that?
not
Like,
endorsing that
was
model.
that their parents saying get
No,
married
I-
after 12
no,
days,
I
or
don't
were they
think
just
so.
like, well,
I think
let's not waste
it's
any time?
I think it's sort of somewhere in between, where now you can also look at like people who I know, maybe you guys know as well, who've like, yeah, we've been together for 6 years and we're deciding whether we want to get engaged. At a certain point, it's like, dude, have
Figure
some
it out.
conviction in your relationship.
What do you feel like is too long?
Right.
What do you
I
feel
mean,
like
it's
is
true, right? Like,
No,
just,
it's a fair
just
point,
like,
yeah.
you know,
What's too long to get engaged? What would you say is a point where, as a guy, it's like
I
by
think
this
that-
time?
I
What's too
think
short? What's too long?
I mean,
from your
this is
perspective?
broad strokes.
Yes,
right? Like,
we
it is just-
understand.
this is not. We're not making policy here. We're.
Maybe we
I mean,
should.
I just
Yeah.
think like if I was talking to a friend,
Yeah.
right, and my friend has been like, if he's been engaged for 3 years, but they're postponing the wedding, I was like, something's off.
Interesting.
Something's off, right? Why get engaged then, right? Or why have the level of partial commitment without just going all in? So that's an instinct that's baked in there. Does that mean 12 days is the right answer? Probably not in the modern society, but part of these are societal norms that are baked into the society you grow up in. And so I think if your engagement is measured in years,
Well, I'm saying
at least
from
if
the
you're my
time
friend or
from the
whatever,
time
I would
of
say, hey,
meeting,
think about it.
from the time
about
of
whether-
meeting somebody to the time where you get engaged. Like, how
Yeah.
long does it take to
I mean,
get to
it
know
depends
somebody?
by person. I think that a lot of people, though, would tell you who are in happily married relationships that are built to last. And I'm grateful and feel fortunate to the world, to God, that I'm in one of those relationships now. But I think I'm one of these people, but many people I know would tell you the same thing. Within a matter of weeks and at times within days,
You'll know.
you know.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
So against that backdrop, like 12 days isn't nuts. But I think if you're talking about within a period of months, if you're serious, right? Like it's one thing to just be like, oh, I'm hanging out with this person and I'm dating like
Right.
5, whatever. I don't, what the culture is right now, but dating 5 people at the same time. And, I'm not going to, it's not like a particularly serious relationship, put that to one side. But if you're actually in a monogamous single person to single person committed relationship where you're invested in getting to know the other person and vice versa, chances are that if you are going to fast forward that 40 or 50 years and say that worked, more often than not, you knew that within the first several months first probably 3 months of being in that relationship.
Okay, a couple of points on this, because we just had Ben Shapiro on recently, and he said the exact same thing. He was
Did
like,
he? Okay, it's
yeah,
interesting.
because he he proposed to his wife at like 2 months, right?
It was early.
After they first met.
Yeah.
It was very quickly after they first met.
But that doesn't strike me as crazy, right? Like,
Well, they
you
have
know,
a great
move on. Yeah.
relationship, plenty
Yeah.
of kids together. So as someone in the dating pool currently, what I'm so scared about is getting into a relationship and not feeling that immediate connection.
You don't need to be scared of it.
But here's the thing. It's like I view relationships as a certain threshold that you have to exceed. And you're like, okay, a threshold of compatibility. Now I know I can be with this person for the rest of my life. But I do think that there is that like pinnacle relationship where you do meet someone and like right off the rip, you're like, okay, this is my person. And it's like, am I going to subvert my expectations to being, exceeding that threshold of compatibility?
Settling
or
for normalcy.
like,
versus,
but there comes a time where you can't continue to date for 20 years and hold out for that pinnacle relationship because then you'll be too old.
No, I know. I think that some of this is just, there's certain things that are in the cards for you in life and certain things that aren't. And I think there are many people who could be happy in a long run lasting relationship with the person who probably still isn't their soulmate. And that's a tough position to be in. But you know what? There's worse things that happen in life too, to a lot of other people
Fair.
that
Yeah.
may never find
sure.
that or may never find internal satisfaction either. So I can't speak for that. One of the things I am most grateful for in my life is that I was in a position to say that very quickly, here's a person I met and this was made to be, and it's obvious within a matter of months. And so we're just, fate is sealed. I wish that for every person. You're asking for the scenario of what happens if I'm not that.
I'm just
if I'm not
expressing
one of the
a
people who
personal
has that-
concern of mine because
Yeah,
I've always
it's
held
fair.
out for like I'm gonna meet that person where it's gonna be
Yeah.
like
But you're
12 days, like
24.
boom.
Right?
Yeah, tomorrow I'm 25.
25. Happy birthday.
Yeah.
Man.
Thank you.
So give yourself a few years. And I would say that probably there's a life staging thing. I guess I haven't been asked for this advice before, so, take it with a grain of salt. But I think it's probably a life staging thing where you give yourself the next 10 years to open yourself up to that possibility. And my advice during those 10 years would be don't waste time in a multi-month relationship
That-
where
where you know it's
that's not going to be
Right.
that's not going to be fitting. Like if 3 months in you're not sure, move on. That'd be my advice for at least the next 10 years of your life. Now you might get into your mid or late 30s later on, and you feel like you want to live a life that brings children into this world, that finds somebody you're compatible with, that maybe doesn't meet this idyllic standard. You can turn to that later. But give yourself the next 10 years to give yourself the maximal chance, as opposed to, I think what I've seen many of my friends go through as well is, I'll be in a relationship where it's compatibility for 3-4 years, but then you get to your late 20s and you're 29 and you're like, what do I do with that? And that was something that probably many of them regret, right? You could have, what was 4 years could have been 4 months, and give yourself, I think
that's
the
a great piece of
opportunity. So
advice
that'd be
right
my, for you specifically in the life stage you're in,
Thank you for the relationship.
would be the
Yeah.
advice. You
I-
asked.
To,
Yeah,
to
this
tie
is good.
off, to tie the knot on this, that's
Yeah,
fine.
there we go.
Yeah,
On this whole
well done.
relationship thing, the one thing that you said that was super fascinating was comparing modern dating, like on algorithm-based apps, to arranged marriage. But the difference is, in arranged marriage, it's the people that probably know you most intimately, know your character, know your values, your personality, belief systems, versus you selecting for yourself what you're interested in, which is the modern dating way. And I find that a
Yeah.
lot less effective. And if I'm correct, it's Carl Jung who said, when it comes to judging one's own character, everyone is horrible. Something like that. Like
You're
you
better
are
judging
not
others than your own. It's
Exactly.
Let me say something about that. I think the people who are making the modern dating apps would say something different. Is it's not even you choosing it.
Oh,
the
really?
AI will know better than you what you're being
But
served.
here's the thing. But the
Right? So
AI.
just because you put in your preferences of what you want to see,
Right. The AI
doesn't
still
mean
feeds you what
it's
they
actually going to feed you. Okay,
but
that's
wouldn't
what you
they
think
want
you
to?
want.
But
here's
wouldn't
what
they
you
want to
actually
give
want.
you the
to
people that like you continue to date and stay on the
Yes.
app rather than the
They're
person
not
you
about
make a
matching people.
viable
They're-
Depends on
partner?
the app. So there's some that some. I mean, it depends. I mean, I'm not a
It seems
marketplace
like
I know a ton
most
about.
want to keep you on as long
That's
as possible.
their business-
Tinder is something
that's
that
their
I've
business
heard.
incentive, right?
They show you
Versus-
the most attractive people first.
Yeah.
You swipe on them, and then it shows you an attractive. It's like a slot machine.
Yeah.
Where they show you an attractive person. I think it was like every 12 to 15 times.
They need to keep you on there.
Yeah, exactly.
So I mean, I'm not up on the latest of what the competitive landscape of these dating
Fair,
apps look like.
yeah.
But I would imagine there's a market niche for, at least back in the day, there used to be the ones that would, what was it, eHarmony or which one that would sort of promise you more, that what you're
Yeah.
in this for is not something in the short run, but something that's long run and lasting. But my only point is, the real question and the real debate is, do you trust an algorithm to do that well, or do you trust the people who
know you best.
know you best
Yeah.
to do that well, and a network and a tradition that makes that happen? So I'm certainly not planning to, and we have no vision that that's how things are going to play out for our kids. It's not how
Right.
it played out for
Right.
me. But all I'm saying is, what seems, even to me growing up, super weird as a model, now that we've entered the postmodern world, it actually makes that previous super weird model of
Right.
my parents seem a little less weird than it once did, because the postmodern
Yeah.
world isn't all that different.
It does seem, though, that there would be more pressure on your parents to get married because of all the family pressure that they put on the two. Versus them coming to their own decision, they could say, well, if our parents, say it's good, wouldn't that have such a big influence on them to believe
It
it's
probably did, that marriage is inherently good.
The
Now,
stigma of divorce as well.
What's
like,
that?
for the cohesiveness
Oh,
of
totally.
arranged marriages,
Yeah.
there is a huge stigma. I
Stigma
feel like
to
in those
divorce.
communities
Absolutely.
too.
Oh, yeah. If they got
divorce.
divorced and their
Absolutely.
family made that
But the
decision
divorce
for
rates
them,
are
I mean,
great
that would be...
amongst arranged marriages, from
What's
what
that?
I've heard. The divorce rates are
Yeah.
like they're
Well,
very
but
low.
part of it might
Yeah.
account for what you just said, which is that if it's tradition that brought you together via an arranged
Right.
marriage, it might be tradition that keeps people together in
Right.
unhappy marriages too. I don't think that's most of what's going on, but to be fair, that's a possibility in certain cases. I am somebody who believes that all else equal. I mean, each person's different. This doesn't mean for every individual, but all else equal, marriage is inherently good. Bringing children into the world in the context of a married household with two parents in the house is inherently good. I don't know that it's such a bad thing for us to adopt that cultural norm. I don't think the government should be enforcing it, but far from it. But I think it's okay for us to embrace a culture that says that all else equal, we're rooting for you to get married, ideally finding
I would agree with that.
that
I would agree with
soulmate,
that.
and that becomes part of a general cultural norm versus the postmodern slide of, well, maybe I will, maybe I won't. Well, maybe I'm a man and maybe I'm a woman, right? I mean, it just goes to, it can go to a level of, once you sort of feel like you're removing a lot of constraints, what it turns out you're doing is you're actually just creating new ones that often can leave you far worse off as a result. And so I think it's this tricky thing where,
It's like the paradox of choice.
yeah,
Isn't it
yeah,
that?
I think yes, I think it's well said. I think that you can become a prisoner of what you feel like is the optical illusion of choice, when in fact it's just a new kind of prison. And so I think we need some level. I think we probably benefit with some level of default structural norms in a culture, in a society, that we still have the freedom to opt out of.
For sure.
And I think that's probably the optimum that I would want to create for my kids, and not just using governmental power, but as a cultural norm. I think that's a good thing in our country, to create a certain default ordering. But there's always going to be people for whom the right answer still isn't fitting in that order. There's still a path to opt out. And, I guess that's probably what my parents had, right? I mean, if my mom or my dad, either of them, said that after those 12 days they don't want to do it, nobody was going to force them to do it. But there was a heavily culturally informed expectation that there's a good chance this is going to work. And as long as you have that opt-out, now there's not, we're just talking about marriage. We're talking about really anything, right? That if you're a man, you dress a certain way. You compete in certain sports in certain ways. But if you're a fully grown adult and you want to do it differently, we're not going to stop you.
Right.
No one's
Right.
going to come to your house with the handcuffs and say you can't do it. But that if you bastardize and pervert that fetishization of choice to say that there's no default norm at all and there shouldn't be those defaults, I think you're just creating a new form of oppression and depression as a consequence. And I think we're veering too far in that direction.
I agree with that, but I also think that we do need to appreciate those that do go away from the norm. Whether or not we like embellish it and like, you know what I mean, like recommend it is a different thing, but we do need to appreciate and respect the the abstraction from the norm.
Yeah, of course. Yeah,
Do you mind
for those for whom that's the right choice.